What up, YouTube fam? We are back with episode 3 of Recite the Light. I know it's been a little minute, your boy been busy, but I'm back at it, planning to upload these every week as I intended to do. Now, before I jump into this week's episode, if you are not already subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing so that you don't miss any of these videos or the other content that I bring to the channel. And make sure you ring that notification bell so you get that notification. Noti gang in the building. And before you step out the door after watching this video, if you could give this video a thumbs up, I would greatly appreciate that. It really does help the channel. So with that out the way, let's jump into this week's episode. Now, this image was done by someone by the name of Audrey B. So there's a lot going on with the lighting here, and that's really why I picked this particular image, because I try to find things that are going to either challenge me in terms of recreating the light, or it's going to challenge me in trying to figure out what was going on. So let's start with the background first. They're using a silver modifier of some sort. And after really looking at this image, and unfortunately it's a low res JPEG, so there were parts that were a little difficult for me because I really just couldn't see the detail that I needed to see. But after looking at this, I do think that this modifier is being lit by a light in the modifier. And what made me think that was just the light that is hitting the inside of her arm on both sides. Now, you can't really see it, but when I zoom in, I can see it. And that kind of lets me know that there's a light back here, because if the light was being reflected from a front light and bouncing back, there likely wouldn't be enough light to be able to light inside the arm right here, because she would be blocking a lot of that light from hitting the modifier in this area. And I'm just not convinced that it would be enough light bouncing from front facing that's hitting this right here and then bouncing back into her arm. So I do think that this modifier was lit. So that is light number 1. Now, light number 2, anytime I'm breaking this down, I'm looking at highlight and I'm looking at shadow, because that's really going to help me understand where the light is coming from. You often hear people say, you look at the catch lights, which is fine, but number 1, there aren't always catch lights, and number 2, that just doesn't always tell the whole story. So by looking at the highlights and the shadows, that's going to help you more, okay? So I can see that the forehead area is lit, but then when I come here, we've got a lot of shadow going on right here. So we got some shadow on the neck. We've definitely got some shadow under the chin. You can see these two highlight area right there, which again is coming from the modifier here. So we've got the shadow under the chin. We've got the shadow under the neck. You can see that her cheekbones have been chiseled out by a shadow. So that definitely let me know that there was a light source that was coming from above, up in this area here. And I figured that light source to be a beauty dish. Now, it may not be a beauty dish, but I'm thinking based off of the way that this light looks and how these shadows are defining her chin and her cheekbones, I think that there was a beauty dish that was above in the typical beauty dish position to be able to light the subject. Now, you will notice, however, that these shadows aren't that deep. And if you have a beauty dish and you're only using a beauty dish and you don't either have another light or a reflector underneath to bounce some light back in, those shadows, specifically underneath the chin and on the neck area, tend to be pretty dark. So the fact that these shadows are not dark let me know that there had to be something that was lighting this area. So that's where I went into the catch lights. Now, you can't see them too well because, again, this is a low res image, but you can see that there are catch lights in the eye. Now, what you will notice about these catch lights is that they're low. They're right basically in the center of the eye. So that lets you know that there was a light source that was basically right in front of the subject. And that really makes sense to me when you pull back and you start to look, that you do have a little bit of light really all throughout the body here. There's some illumination even down to her hands. There's no shadow here, right? So if we only had a beauty dish that was up here, the beauty dish is going to be relatively close. So when you think about inverse square law, that light is not going to make it all the way down here to her hands, not evenly in that fashion. So when you take all of those things into consideration, it makes it very clear that there was a decent sized light source right in front of her. So most likely cameraman here, big light source behind that is basically illuminating everything. Now, it's not very powerful. It's not enough to really light the subject. It's just enough to fill in those shadows. And you can tell that by the catch light. So essentially what we have is one light on the modifier. We have the second light that's likely in a beauty dish above. And then we have the third light that is in front of the subject lighting everything. Now, with respect to the background here, the background is obviously all black. And that could be done on location in camera, or it could be done in post. Obviously, it's hard for me to say which one it was. If you have enough distance to where this modifier that's the background and your subject is far enough away from the wall, or if they were in a very large space, you absolutely could take this image and have all of that be complete darkness if there wasn't anything back there for the light to bounce off of. More realistically, this was probably done in post. So they had the image, and then in post, they basically just kind of blacked everything out to isolate. But it could be done either way, okay? So that's the light that we have. So now if we come over here to my image, so essentially what I did is exactly what I mentioned. So I started off with the background, and so I'm using a 60-inch glow easy lock quick octa, and I have a Yongnuo speed light in there set at 1/28 power, and that was basically just to light the modifier and give it that pop. Now this modifier has this shiny silver finish, whereas in the inspiration photo it was beaded, so they have a little bit more texture, and the shape of their modifier was definitely nicer. But that speed light was meant just to light the modifier, just to give it that pop. So then from there, I used a 22-inch white beauty dish that I had placed above in the typical beauty dish position. And so that's giving me the light that's on my face. You know, all of this light that you see here, this is all coming from that beauty dish. So then from there, behind camera, I had a 36-inch quick octa setup that was basically right above the camera. So, you know, if the camera lens was right here, you know, the octa was right here, was right above it. And that was basically just to fill in all of those shadows. Okay. And so with me being dark complected versus the inspiration image, obviously the tonality is a little bit different. With her being fair complexion, her skin is reflecting a lot of that light, where my skin not so much. So, you know, I'm looking a little bit darker. I'm not popping as much, but that's simply because of the skin tones. I'm just a darker individual, so that's just the way that goes. Okay. So I have that, the 36-inch octa, another Yongnuo speed light in there to basically do that fill and light everything from the front. And if I zoom in here, you can see those catch lights. Now my catch lights are a little bit higher, and I think that's because I'm using a smaller modifier than what they used. I do think they used a really large modifier, like a 5, 6, or 7 foot modifier behind them, so they were able to get that low. Whereas mine being the 36, I did have it a little bit higher because it was above the camera lens. So my catch light is a little bit higher, but you can see that catch light. So we've got that illumination. So then from there, I use Photoshop to darken everything, because I took this image in a small space. So that front modifier lit everything behind my background modifier, lit everything. Okay. And there was no way to get around it, because the modifier was placed a little bit further back. So to be able to get enough exposure to make it to me, I had to have the flash power up pretty high. So everything was lit. So there was no getting this in camera for me. I just didn't have the space. So I basically just brought it into Photoshop, masked out everything, and just turned it black to be able to get this effect. And again, that is what I think they did as well in their image. And so here we go. So here are the two images side by side. So there you have it. Hopefully you have learned something. If you haven't already smashed that like button, please make sure you tap it on your way out the door. So until the next Recite the Light video, take care.